Good evening. On behalf of the Enfield High School Youth Vote Committee, I would like to welcome you to the Town of Enfield Board of Education Candidates Debate. My name is Shelby Brennan, and I will be the moderator for tonight's debate. I would like to start off tonight's proceedings with a Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. The flag is located in the back. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. This debate is for the public and is hosted by the Enfield High School Youth Vote Committee students. The goal of Enfield High School Youth Vote Committee is to educate the public and learn about the Board of Education's candidates. The debate will begin with each candidate giving a 1-minute opening statement, followed by a round of 10 questions asked by the 3 students who organized this debate. In regards to these questions, there will be 2 rounds consisting of 5 questions. The order of the questions was determined prior to this debate. Each candidate answering a question will be granted 2 minutes or 120 seconds to respond. Candidates, your time remaining will be displayed on 2 cards by our timekeepers in the pit of the front of the stage. The yellow indicates that you have 30 seconds remaining, and the red indicates that your time has ended. The candidate giving the rebuttal will be given 1.5 minutes or 90 seconds to respond. We ask that each candidate honor the time that he or she will be allotted to answer or rebut a question. We also ask each candidate to display proper decorum throughout this debate. Following the 10 questions, the audience will be given a chance to have their questions answered as time permits. Candidates wishing to respond will be given 1 minute for response. Audience members may submit their questions in a box located in the rear of the auditorium or give them to an Enfield High School Youth Vote student who will be circulating throughout the auditorium. Please write your question legibly on a piece of paper provided in your programs. Additional question sheets are located by the question box in the back of the auditorium. We ask that proper decorum from the audience will be maintained in this important activity. Before we begin, there are a few ground rules to be expressed. Please hold all applause until the end so the candidates have all their allotted time to fully answer their given question. Also, please refrain from comments or other disruptive outbursts. We also ask that you turn off your cell phones now. If you cannot comply with these rules, you may be asked to leave the auditorium. It is now my honor to introduce the 2013 Board of Education candidates for tonight's debate. For the Democratic Party, Mr. Vincent Grady, Ms. Tina LeBlanc, Mr. Timothy Neville, and Ms. Stacy Thurston. Due to a work obligation, Vincent Weslisa was regretfully unable to attend. For the Republican Party, Mr. David Booley, Mr. Peter Janitis, Mr. Tom Serrard, Mrs. Lori Ungeyer, and Mr. David Waller. Now each candidate will be given 1 minute for their opening remarks. Democrats, you begin. Yes, please, sorry.
Okay. I just want to thank the Enfield High Youth Vote Committee for tonight's debate tonight. My name is Vincent Grady. I've been on the Board of Education for 3 terms already, going for a 4th term. The reason I'm doing this is because I've become very involved in the board the last couple of terms, and understanding the views or the concepts or what goes on in the school systems. I work as a 3rd grade fire education teacher and understand some of the things going on. I talk to teachers and administrators and all that stuff. I understand what we need, what we don't need, and I like to remain on the board to also prolong and progress our district.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. Tina LeBlanc.
Hi, my name is Tina LeBlanc, and I'm running for re-election as a Democratic candidate for the Enfield Board of Education. Currently, I have 3 children in the school system in the intermediate, middle school, and high school levels. I am seeking re-election as I feel that I have really only begun what I started 2 years ago. As a concerned citizen, parent, and taxpayer, I have been able to be part of the high school consolidation project, implement full-day kindergarten, as well as bring iPad Consortium to our schools. I believe we have made great strides during my last term, but am up for the challenge of making even bigger strides. I continue to have a vested interest in the school system for many years to come. Should I get reelected to the Board of Education, I will continue to fight for responsible funding and to continue the investment in Enfield's future. We need to have more families wanting to move to Enfield and fewer families leaving. The parents of this town need a voice on the Board of Education, and I believe for the students and the parents, I can be that voice.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Timothy Neville.
Thank you. My name is Tim Neville. I'm running for re-election. Please excuse my voice. I have a little laryngitis here. I want you to know I appreciate your presence here this evening, especially since we are competing with another important event, the World Series. And although both are important, the school board election on November 5th will have much more impact on the town of Enfield than the World Series, even if the Sox do pull it off. Your votes will help determine education for Enfield students for the next 2 years. The question in all of your minds is, why do we want to do this? Obviously, everyone on this stage cares about this town and the education we provide our children. The question for voters is, who is best prepared to take on this responsibility? Our comments tonight will hopefully answer that question. As for myself, I'm here because I love this town. My wife and I are retired Enfield educators, lived in town for over 40 years, and our 4 kids got wonderful educations here. And I want to make sure that today's students get the same opportunities my kids got. So instead of sitting back in retirement, I got involved. I'm completing my first term. I'm asking you to re-elect me so we can continue what we started.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston.
Hi, I'm Stacy Thurston. Thank you again, for this opportunity. I served on the board from 2009 to 2011. I took some time off. During that time, I kept in touch with things that were going on within the town, within the school system, and I actually missed being a part of it and getting involved. I am looking, obviously, for re-election. I am looking forward to getting back out there and working with the staff and with the students, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. Now for the Republicans, Mr. Booley.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming as well, the youth vote organizers for putting this together, and my fellow candidates. Since I'm one of the new faces up here, I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name is David Boulay. I live in a small house on Belmont Ave with my wife Liz and our 2 young sons, Camden and Owen. I actually grew up in a small town in Maine, and almost 20 years ago I moved here because there was more work here. And yes, when I was writing that, I realized just how old I've become. I've always been interested in government, but only recently decided to get involved here at the local level. And the Board of Ed is of particular interest to me for 2 main reasons. It affects our kids, and education represents more than 60% of our tax dollars. I have a lot to learn and look forward to doing so with some of the seasoned members up here, but I do have my own reasons for being here, making sure that we stretch every dollar by making wise choices, making parents feel like their voices are not only heard but listened to, and working
Thank you, Mr.
together.
Boulay.
Thank you.
Mr. Tom Soror. Oh, I'm so sorry. Mr. Janitis.
Thank you for hosting this debate. However, due to time constraints, I'll get right to the point. I am seeking a 3rd term on the Board of Education. It was not my intent to do so. However, I felt compelled to do so because of many of the actions the present board has taken. The following but are a few of the areas of concern to me: rampant cronyism, the lack of serious discussion of the future use of Fermi High School, the establishment of an expanded Voc Ed program for the kids in Enfield who will not be attending college, the armed security guard debacle, the costly expansion of the central office with unneeded administrators, behind closed-door votes, the process for which Enfield High color decision was made, the total embracing of Common Core, the new and costly evaluation system our teachers will be encumbered with, and accepting that there's fat in our budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Soror.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking God for not throwing us a curveball this year with the weather and actually allowing us to have a debate. I would also like to thank the students and faculty involved with the Enfield Student Youth Program. I know you guys have worked very hard. You should all be commended, and you should all be proud. I'm running again for a 3rd term on the Board of Education. I know we're going to be facing some serious challenges in the future. With the new mandates coming out of the state and federal government, I think that experience is going to matter in the next few years. since being placed back on the board. I think I've been a calming force on the board, and we've actually got a lot more accomplished in the last 6 months than we have probably the entire year. So I want to commend my colleagues, I want to commend those who are running here, and I again want to thank all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherrod. Mrs. Ungeheuer?
Hi, my name is Lori Ungeheuer, and I'd like to thank the Enfield School System for allowing us to be here, and especially the Youth Vote Committee. I commend you all being students, getting active politically. One of the things I'd like to say is that Enfield's been a great town for me. I went through the school system here myself, my children have, my husband, and I want to give back. This is a new endeavor for me, and I'd really like this opportunity to work with this board and try to make some positive decisions. I also want Enfield to continue to be the great town that it is, to raise families and to educate our children.
Thank you, Mrs. Ungeheuer. Mr. Walwer?
Thank you to the faculty and students for putting on tonight's debate. It's a wonderful opportunity for the public to listen to the views of the candidates and to then make a determination on November 5th who they would like to support. I'm running for the Board of Education because I believe every student in the Enfield Public School System should have the opportunity to succeed not only in the school system but beyond in life. I'm running for the board because I believe every student who qualifies to go on to higher education should be able to qualify for any of the prestigious colleges and universities here in the United States, including the University of Connecticut. And finally, I'm running for the Board of Education in order to give the public an opportunity to have a voice in their school system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. It is now time for the research questions to be asked by the students. The Republican Party won the coin toss and chose to answer second. The first question will be asked by Hanadi Slayman to Mr. Vincent Grady, with a rebuttal from Mr. David Boulay.
Earlier this year, the Enfield Town Council and Board of Education reached agreement on the funding of all-day kindergarten for the 2013-2014 academic year. Would you support the funding of all-day kindergarten in future years? Why or why not?
I don't know, I really couldn't hear the question that well.
She wants to,
Do you want me to repeat it?
Can I help him with that?
Yeah, I just,
I can repeat the question if you want.
no, can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. Earlier this year, the Enfield Town Council and Board of Education reached agreement on the funding of all-day kindergarten for the 2013-2014 academic year. Would you support the funding of all-day kindergarten in future years? Why or why not?
Oh, and absolutely, I support it 100%. We've been trying for many years, even some of our colleagues through the years have been trying to get all-day kindergarten. We never were able to get the funding properly for it. We had some good administrators this year that were able to fund it, and we were able to pass it both through the Town Council and the Board of Education. I think it's a tremendous asset for the town of Enfield and for the kids of this district. I mean, full-day kindergarten is a win-win for this town and for the students and the parents of this town, but support it 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. And your rebuttal, Mr. Boulay?
I actually completely agree with everything you said, and I'd just like to add, I believe it's actually going to be mandated by the state of Connecticut anyway, so.
The second question will be asked by Rebecca Califf to Mrs. Tina LeBlanc, with a rebuttal from Mr. Peter Janitis.
In the youth vote candidate profiles, many candidates expressed a desire to enhance public engagement with the Board of Education. How can the Board of Education enhance public engagement in its decision-making processes?
That's a good question. We hold community conversations and we hold listen and learn events, and based on some of the decisions in my previous term, whether it be the school security officers or the decision to choose which high school to use, parents wanted more of a voice. So I think what the board needs to be more diligent of is allowing time for parents beyond the regular scheduled board meetings to come out and engage in a setting almost similar to this with the school administration, to listen to the parents' concerns a little bit more diligently and accept what parents are concerned about on all levels. even maybe 3 times a year during the school year, every 3 months, because parents are a huge part of our school community. I mean, they give us the children that we all love. And I think that would be one way in order to enhance parent engagement or community engagement, because you don't even always need the parents, because there's a lot of residents in town who may not have children in the system or grandchildren, but they're residents and they love the town and still would like a voice through education.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. And your rebuttal, Mr. Janitis?
Well, if anybody can figure out the answer at how to get parents more involved, let us know, because we certainly tried. It's very important that parents get involved, not just publicly, but even at home, helping the kids do homework, keeping an eye on them. Things have changed an awful lot lately, and I haven't seen parent involvement across the board really increasing. I think one thing where we didn't get parents involved to a large degree was when that whole security issue came up and the decision was made, and then the meeting was held here. I would have liked to seen the meeting held before any decisions were made, because the public who got here and got involved certainly had some opinions to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. The third question will be asked by Christine Luxick to Mr. Timothy Neville with a rebuttal from Mr. Tom Serrard.
How can the Board of Education and Town Council work together for the benefit of Enfield students? If elected, what improvements, if any, would you like to see in the relationship?
I think, first of all, they have to work together for the benefit of Enfield students. And I think over the last 2 years, I think there's been a number of things that have happened that have facilitated that. I think we've started to look at things through a common lens and look for a common goals that we share. And I think we looked at those things in a big way when we looked at the suicide issue that we had in this town, which was tearing this town apart. And I think the committee that we set up and the training that happened out of that, one of the things was Rachel's Challenge, which was just wonderful. But that was a collaborative effort on the part of the board and the council. And it's something that continues to this day. We're heading into our second year of that and planning for a third. I think we also tried to put aside Democrats, Republicans, town council people, and board members, and found common themes that we agreed with. And I think coming up with all-day kindergarten was one of those things. So I think we can always increase it, but I think we're doing some of it already. And I think this last term has shown that.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. And your rebuttal, Mr. Serrard?
Well, I know in my first term on the Board of Education, the Town Council and the Board of Education worked very well together. While I was sitting at home watching it on TV while I was on the sidelines briefly, I did notice there was a rather contentious relationship when it came to the budget the first cycle. That's unfortunate. I know that by the second cycle with the budget, things worked themselves out very well. You have to work with the Town Council. We're still a separate body, and that's an important thing to remember. We're responsible to the state and the town. The town is responsible to the town. But we have to work together. Otherwise, nothing gets accomplished.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. The fourth question will be asked by Hanadi Slayman to Mrs. Stacy Thurston with a rebuttal from Mrs. Lori Unghire.
The introduction of security guards in the Enfield Public Schools has been a topic of intense debate over the past several months. Do you support armed security guards in our public schools? Why or why not?
It is a very touchy subject. I honestly feel something needs to be done. Do I feel right now the armed guards is the answer? I honestly don't know. I feel we need to keep our children safe. Something needs to be done. Having guns in our schools, no, I don't feel that is something that should be there.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. Your rebuttal, Mrs. Unghire?
I didn't agree with that decision to have all the armed guards. After I saw what Newtown decided, they didn't have the armed guards in their schools. There's only 2 towns in the whole state of Connecticut that do have the armed guards. If it's something that our town really insists on having, I'd certainly be interested in discussing it more.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. The fifth question will be asked by Rebecca Califf to Mr. Vincent Grady, with a rebuttal from Mr. David Walwer.
Over the past 5 years, the Enfield Board of Education's budget was flat funded during the 2010, 2011, and 2012 school years, and increased by 0.68% in 2013 and 1.78% in 2014. Would you support an increase in the 2015 education budget? Why or why not?
I would support an increase in the budget if we need to do so. I think we work well together to be fiscally responsible for all taxpayers, but actually provide the opportunities for the students and the teachers, the tools for the teachers. I can't say right now, depending on what the budget's going to be, if I don't automatically approve of an increase. I approve of a fiscally sound budget. What is right for the district, what is right for the students, and what's right for the teachers and the tools that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. And your rebuttal, Mr. Walwer?
Well, one of the things that we practice in our family is you have to live within your means, and I believe that that goes the same for the town of Enfield and the school department. If there's the opportunity to bring in new programs, one has to evaluate them against existing programs. Maybe we can replace some with better ones and eliminate ones that are not as good. So I think we need to have an overall evaluation of programs when a new, improved opportunity comes our way.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. And now for our second round of questioning. The sixth question will be asked by Christine Luxick to Mr. David Boulay, with the rebuttal from Mrs. Tina LeBlanc. I'm so sorry.
What are your priorities for the Enfield Board of Education's 2014 to 2015 budget? Please support your answer with specifics.
Well, being new to this, I'm certainly got quite a learning curve. I'm definitely ready to start digging into the budget and trying to find the fat that I keep hearing about. I think it's important for us to, as one of the other candidates mentioned, live within our means. We need to understand what we can afford and work within that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. And your rebuttal, Mrs. LeBlanc?
One of the things that I learned in my first term was watching what happens at the state level, because what's happening at the state level is a huge issue for what's going to happen on our town level. So my priorities would be to be watching the state mandates constantly and seeing what the State Department of Education is issuing. I would continue to fight to keep programs and fight for the programs in our schools. I would also like to see a greater concentration focused on the arts in our schools, as sometimes with low enrollment in classes, those are the classes that kind of come up for discussion at budget time. I would also like to have a new discussion on the school security guards as a priority in the new school budget, because currently I believe that there's issues with that, and as other constituents had mentioned, the public came out and gave their voice on it after the decision was made. So those would be my priorities.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. The seventh question will be asked by Hanadi Slayman to Mr. Peter Janitis, with a rebuttal from Mrs. Stacy Thurston.
Do you support public funding for charter and magnet schools? Why or why not?
Yes, I do. I think competition is good. I think charter schools across the country in some areas have shown tremendous success. I think it's saved a lot of inner city schools for sure, kids in inner city schools. If done poorly, it could be a disaster, so you're going to have some sort of watchdog watching over these charter schools. It's definitely a direct competition to the public schools, but I think possibly charter schools, the popularity that they seem to be getting, along with things like homeschooling, are a result of things that really we're not meeting in the public schools. There's just so many demands in the public schools, I truly think we can't meet them, as hard as we try as teachers. There's just so much to do, but if you can take a child and put them in a setting where you feel comfortable and the job that you expect is being done, I have no qualms. I don't think it's any different than if you want to go to a parochial school or something like that. It's a choice people will make.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. And your rebuttal, Mrs. Thurston?
You know, I agree with Mr. Janitis. There needs to be not competition, a choice. But, you know, a majority of us went through the public school. I think we turned out pretty good. So I'm running for the Board of Education for our schools. I want to make our schools, you know, the best that they can be. I don't want to lose children to the charter schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. The 8th question will be asked by Rebecca Califf to Mr. Tom Serrard with a rebuttal from Mr. Timothy Neville.
This year, Enfield secondary school teachers will be evaluated using the new state-mandated evaluation system. What is the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of the new teacher evaluation plan, and why? Be specific.
Well, to begin with, I am absolutely positively against the new system that the state is mandating us to do to evaluate our teachers. I think it is redundant to the extreme, and I think it's an overreach. We had a fairly successful evaluation system in place before, and it's costing us a lot of money that could be better served serving our students instead of harassing our teachers. I mean, if you're going to have a mandate system, or if you're going to mandate a system evaluation, you better have something that has teeth. But at the same time, you don't have someone who's going to be evaluated time and time and time and time again. We've gone 4 times. They were raising our evaluations per teacher to level of 4. 4 times the number than they've had in the past. And I just think that's absolutely ridiculous and an incredible waste of money. I have other issues with the same system. I have other issues with the state mandates. I mean, we all want an improved school system. Unfortunately, the state dictates to us and grossly underfunds us. And that is the biggest problem. And it's not just me saying that they grossly underfund us. It's the state Supreme Judicial Court that says it. So, again, the state is not doing us any favors, and in fact, they're more often than not complicating things. So, no, I am not in favor at all of the new teacher's evaluation system.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. And your rebuttal, Mr. Neville?
I think Mr. Sherrod and I both agree on unfunded mandates. There are too many of them, and it puts us in a precarious position in the town to try to deal with that and also carry out some of the things that on the local level we know are important. In terms of the evaluation concept itself, I think there's some great potential to it. I think the way it's been rushed and the way it's being pushed right now is problematic. I'm more than willing to give the idea of accountability a chance, get data from teachers, get data from parents, and I think those are good things. I think the structure of it and the push to get it done within a tight time frame without, in my mind, adequate funding is problematic, but I would still give it a chance.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. The 9th question will be asked by Christine Luxick to Mrs. Lori Unghire with a rebuttal from Mrs. Tina LeBlanc.
Should it be a budget priority of the board to guarantee that all students attending public schools in Enfield have access to the internet and develop the technological skills that will prepare them to the 21st century workplace? If yes, how can the board ensure that there will be funding to implement a comprehensive technology plan?
I think all the students need access to the internet, and it's just such a wealth of information. I'm still new, and I'm learning about the financial end of it, so I'd have to learn more about that.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. And your rebuttal, Mrs. LeBlanc?
That students can use the internet as a valuable learning tool. I believe in what I've seen on my term on the board that the teachers also like to use it as a valuable learning tool. How can we ensure the funding would be up to the board that gets elected to make that a priority for technology, for the students to continue to implement the internet access in the school system. I believe that currently we have a curriculum director that not only looks at just the curriculum, but she always looks at technology as a way to move the district forward.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Our 10th question will be asked by Hanadi Slayman to Mr. David Walwer with a rebuttal from Mr. Vincent Grady.
The construction of the new consolidated high school is scheduled for the summer of 2014 and opening in 2016. Some students have expressed concerns regarding a number of issues associated with consolidation, including the impact of construction on the student body, student-to-teacher ratios, and course selections. In your view, what are the greatest challenges concerning high school consolidation for students and staff? How should the Board of Education address these concerns?
It's a good thing that we're consolidating two buildings into one. I believe it's going to present more opportunities than problems. The opportunity for students to have more diverse courses, the opportunity for students to have more AP courses, the opportunity for athletic teams to excel because we're going to have a larger student body on these teams. I believe that we have a buildings committee that is monitoring the timetable for construction and the move-in date in the fall of 2016, and I have every confidence in Randy Daigle and his team that they will address any of the issues that come up between now and then.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. And your rebuttal, Mr. Grady?
Well, I would have to agree with Mr. Walwer on a lot of those points. The consolidation is a tremendous asset for this town. It's going to combine the two high schools. One of the reasons that we did it is because of the student population dropping and courses being dropped because there wasn't enough students in each class to maintain classes that students really wanted. So you're consolidating the schools, and now the students will have that opportunity to get those classes back, or maybe to advance even more courses that weren't available because of class sizes. So I think it's a win-win for this town and for the students in this town.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. We will now entertain questions from the audience. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question if he or she chooses to do so. Candidates, please raise your hand if you wish to answer the asked questions. Hanadi Slayman.
Do you feel teacher input and involvement is important when making big decisions like the armed guards in the schools? Do you feel teacher input and involvement is important when making big decisions like armed guards in schools?
Teacher.
Mr. Grady.
Actually, that's a very good question. I think input from anybody is a good thing, from teachers, from parents, from students, from anybody involved in the community, from the armed guard situation to high school consolidation to when we had kindergarten discussions. I think it's a tremendous thing to get input from the public and hear both sides of the story. I think being on the board, you have to listen to both sides to make a fair vote.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. LeBlanc?
I believe that the teacher input is very crucial in the sense that they are in the schools all day. They know how the schools operate. They know the children. They would see how not only school security officers could affect the day, but other changes to the school building could affect the day. And I think that they would be an integral part, or should have been an integral part in that decision-making process.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Neville?
I think input from all constituencies is good in any one of these questions. I think all of them, whether it be teachers, administrators, parents, council people, citizens, whatever, want to provide input to do that. I think one of the problems we have is providing avenues for that, even for the meetings. I mean, I think we had at least tried on the board side to have some meetings, and we couldn't get the message out. People just didn't show when there were an open meeting. I think, unfortunately, I don't think people don't subscribe to newspapers as much as they used to. I think there's a lot of social media that we're not taking as much advantage of. So I think we have to find other avenues to do that, to get the message out and solicit the input.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston?
We do need their input. I mean, these are their children. These are our children. They're, in the community with them at times more than the parents are. So, yeah, they do need to have the input to keep our children safe.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. Mr. Boulay?
I think we absolutely need their input for all the reasons we've just heard, as well as buy-in. If you don't ask someone something and you just put it into place without their input, there's going to be a lot of contention there. So it's important to get everybody's buy-in for the relationship to move forward between a guard and a school staff.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. Mr. Janitis?
As a teacher of almost 38 years, I would hope most of my former colleagues and everything realize that there is no place for armed guards in schools. It's nothing that I think most teachers would ascribe to. And I just don't think teachers are going to agree to something like that, or if they had a choice, I would think they would have spoken against it. The public has to make the decision. The meeting that was held here at Enfield High School in the auditorium, a lot of people spoke out, and we heard them loud and clear. And I think the board and the town council should listen to what the people want in town, and whatever the people so choose as far as the armed guards are concerned, the teachers are going to have to live with it. That's just the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
I think in most major decisions that the input from all of the stakeholders is very important. I think as a board, we have made significant strides over the past 4 years in reaching out to the public and reaching out to our employees. There's always room for improvement, and I strongly believe that we could make significant, even greater strides, I think is a better way to put it, towards that goal. Things are a lot different than they were even 6 years ago. So again, we're making it a priority. I plan on making it a priority if I'm elected to the next term. So yes, input on major decisions from all the stakeholders is very important.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Unghire?
First, I'd like to say it's unfortunate that in 2013 that we're even faced with these kind of questions, that we have to confront these issues. It's just a sad time, but I think we do need to consider everyone when we're making a decision like that for our public schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
I'm glad that this is a noble experiment that's temporary and is being revisited in 2 years. And in walking door to door and listening to the public, including teachers who live here and work here in Enfield and other communities, I believe they were shut out, and we need to have open dialogue over the next 2 years. And if elected, I will ensure that all stakeholders, including teachers, have a seat at the table.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Rebecca Califf?
Enfield's collaborative KITE has, with the input of the community, written a 2-year early education and care community plan. What value do you think KITE brings to Enfield, and what role should the Board of Education play in the implementation of this plan?
Yes, Mr. Neville.
I think KITE, we should support KITE 1,000%. Okay, KITE has organized folks around themes that we need to address, early childhood, and have trained folks to the reasons for that. They've trained folks to how to deliver that. They've also supported us in terms of our all-day kindergarten. They spearheaded that attempt to get that particular project passed. And I think it was because of the information and the data that they put out to us that enabled us to make a well-informed decision. They're wonderful people. They work behind the scenes, but they do a wonderful and incredible job. And that 2-year plan that they have is so comprehensive that it would be difficult for us to do the work that they do and provide for us.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston? Mr. Boulay? Mr. Janitis?
Kite does a nice job. This idea of early childhood education is a noble cause, but it's got to get on a priority list, I think. Again, as somebody who spent a lot of time, my whole career, teaching in this town, there are other things that have to be, I think, on top of that list. One being an expanded vocational education program in this town. There are a lot of kids not going on to college. And if we can offer at Fermi High School, we only have 1 minute? An alternative ed program, I think, has to be issued. The kindergarten we got through. But this, noble, but let's take care of some other things first.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
I support Kite. I support most of our nonprofits that are here for the educational support of our children. Unfortunately, I would love to be more supportive of all of them if it wasn't for our legislature, which punishes us every year by underfunding us. If Enfield was left on its own to be able to decide what it needs and what it doesn't, I'm fairly sure that we could figure it out. Unfortunately, we're mandated by the state and by the people in the legislature who dictate to us, literally, and we're required by law to follow that. So it puts a hurt on our finances and makes it very difficult to pay for alternatives. So unless we can actually get a hold of the finances from the state and make them change their minds, I think that, as Peter said, when it comes to priorities, we have to focus on the priorities that are coming to us from the state.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Unghire?
I don't know enough information about Kite to really have an opinion, but once I'm on the board, I'll learn more details.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
It's another new acronym for me, and as a newcomer, I'm obviously got to learn more about the values that this particular organization provides to children. But I do want to echo what Tom said about local control of education. I believe that we have to get some of the shackles of the state of Connecticut off our backs to allow our teachers and our administrators to educate children.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
I'm sorry. I'd like to kind of echo what Mr. Neville was saying about Kite. I mean, I don't think everybody understands what Kite has really done for this town. They've brought businesses in and supported education in this town. And without that organization, we wouldn't have that support from our area businesses. So they've done a tremendous job, and whatever the Board of Education can do, we should do it.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. Thurston? Oh, I'm so Mrs. LeBlanc?
I would like to echo what Vinny's saying about community, because we were talking about the Kite Community Plan, and if you go to a Kite meeting, they have so many members of the community there, from head teachers at preschools in town to social services to the special ed directors that we have in Enfield. They have built a sense of community in Kite to want to help the town of Enfield with early childhood education. It's hard not to jump on board with that community feel, as well as getting the businesses in. And I champion them because they, every year, are applying for grants and looking for new ways to get funding.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Christine Luxick?
We had a big tax increase for the Board of Education. With downsizing and closing schools, how do you justify that?
Candidates? Mr. Janitis?
Ask them.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
A large chunk of money was allocated to the Board of Education, and that's what happened. Again, we get shorted about $16 to $20 million every year. You got to make up for it somewhere. And the state has been cited for relying too heavily on property taxes to fund education. Again, I'm going to cite the Supreme Judicial Court of the state of Connecticut. That was their determination. They short fund us. We have an obligation to educate our kids. Therefore, we have to raise taxes in order to do that. I am the last one that wants to raise your taxes, and I fight very hard not to. But when the state makes that happen, they make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Unghire?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure. I couldn't really hear what you were saying.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, a little bit louder.
We had a big tax increase for the Board of Education. With downsizing schools and closing schools, how do you justify that?
Again, I don't have all the details with regard to that, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
It is true that we did have a large tax increase. And it is true that we consolidated the elementary grades from 9 buildings to 7 so that the programs could be enriched even more and so the class sizes could be reduced. And it is true that we are going to be consolidating into one high school, but adding a more diverse range of education opportunities for our students. So I'm not sure that there's a relationship between the two.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
I don't believe that the whole tax increase was due to Board of Education increase. I mean, we had things on the town side that needed to be done and had to be funded. I think the town council took a bold move in supporting a full-day kindergarten, and they saw the need for it in this town. And yes, that took a little bit of money to do so. They took the initiative to do it. As Mr. Bully said earlier today, it's going to be mandated in the next few years. I think we did a great thing in being proactive and instead of reactive to the full-day kindergarten. And like, again, I applaud the town council for funding it.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. LeBlanc?
I was not on the board that voted to close and downsize the schools, but I was on the board after that, and that's what brought me to run for election, for an elected position on the board. I don't believe that the closing of the schools and the downsizing saved the money that they thought it would.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Neville?
Likewise, I wasn't on the board until afterwards, but I did watch us get flat funded for almost 5 years. And I saw the damage that it did to the school, and it actually spurred me to run for the board. You can put off things only so long. You have a leak in your roof, you can put it off for a year or two, but eventually you have to pay it. And I think we put off some things and we cut some programs significantly over the last 5 years. And I think the bill came due. We had to do some things. All-day kindergarten certainly was a benefit of it, but also we had to maintain some programs that we just needed for the benefit of the kids. And I think finally we tried to work with the council on that. There were needs there in terms of equipment and stuff like that that hadn't been planned for and hadn't been paid for in years. And sometimes the bill comes due. I think it was a good decision. I'd rather do it gradually over time if we have a need than to do it in one lump sum, but you have to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston? Mr. Boulay?
To echo some of the other folks that have already commented, I know part of that increase, again, was the all-day K, which, again, I fully support. Again, being new to all this, I certainly haven't had the opportunity to dissect the budget. I'm not completely convinced, although maybe I'm way off base here, but I'm not completely convinced that there aren't areas within the existing budget that could certainly be looked at to offset some of these other requirements as opposed to a tax increase, but I definitely look forward to digging into that.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. Hanadi Slayman?
What is the Board of Education doing to prevent the problem of bullying in the schools? What protocol is being followed through for the offenders? What is the Board of Education doing to prevent the problem of bullying in the schools? What protocol is being followed through for the offenders?
Mrs. LeBlanc?
I would like to say that the problem of bullying, one of the ways that Enfield Schools seems to be combating it is to hold the Rachel's Challenge events. I was able to participate in the JFK Rachel's Challenge event, and that impacted me so much as an adult. I can imagine the impact it had on the students, and I wish we could almost do Rachel's Challenge over a period of a week with 100 students a day, just rather than the 100 students for the one event. The protocols for bullying falls under the board policies and how the administration and the teachers and the administrators are going to be handling it. I think that Rachel's Challenge, it was in conjunction with the town council, and I believe that as a town, we are trying to combat the bullying, but in the school system, holding those Rachel's Challenge events and clubs is one step in a huge direction for the schools.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Neville?
I guess I'd have to echo what Tina said. I think the problem of bullying has been around forever, and we've tried all kinds of things to deal with it, and the schools have a strict protocol in terms of how to deal with that, and they actively and aggressively go after that. But the real place to deal with it is kid to kid, because that's where the bullying happens. And I think that's where the effectiveness of the Rachel's Challenge Act of Kindness issues have come to play. We've seen tremendous gains or tremendous reductions in bullying. And I think the approach of working with it at the kid level is a key place to go. We still have our part at an administrative level, but that part will help it the most.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston?
I like what Mr. Neville said. I echo what Mrs. LeBlanc said. And I think the Rachel's Challenge is a huge step forward in combating bullying.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. Mr. Boulay?
Another big thumbs up for Rachel's Challenge here, as well as I really like the attention that it's been getting. I feel like, bullies have been around forever. I mean, we all see the movies from the 80s, and they're always portrayed. So I think the attention that it's being given is fantastic at the local level as well as at the national level. I think it's a great step forward in combating the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. Mr. Janitis?
Bullies have been around for a long time. They're still around, and they're going to be around. As a teacher, the one part that's really new to me is this cyberbullying. I've never had to deal with that, so I don't have my hands on that, but it's an issue that has to be addressed, and it's gotten a lot of national attention. Teachers in the classrooms, in the hallways, in the lunchroom, are usually vigilant on bullies, and whenever you do spot them, there's a lot of different ways you can handle it, either doing it personally or sending these kids to the office and have them handling it. But a lot of bullies probably come from homes where there are some bullies.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Sherrard?
My colleagues have already mentioned everything about Rachel's Challenge. I mean, we are concerned about the school environment. I agree with Mr. Janitis. I think the electronic media causes a significant problem. I think we should address that next year as tightening our policy. I don't think texting belongs in school. I know parents would like to stay in charge of their children and in touch with their children in case of an emergency. However, I think we need to tighten the electronic media, especially in the elementary school levels and possibly even at the high school level. You're there to learn. So that's just my feeling on it.
Thank you, Mr. Sherrard. Mrs. Unghire?
I would like to say, while I've been out campaigning, going door to door, a lot of people have brought that up, parents and students as well. So it's definitely something that needs a lot of attention. Rachel's Challenge and even the mentor program, I'd really like to look into both of those, and I think that they really sound like it's a good solution, but I'd like to look into that more.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
We have a big societal problem. Parents need to take responsibility for their children's action. It's one of the reasons why this concept of bullying, which has been around thousands of years, exists today and has been exacerbated. We need to look at opportunities to integrate the parents more into this process so that they take responsibility for their child's action in the schools. And as far as on the ground, the teachers are our foot soldiers, and they see what's going on, and we need to empower them more, because when I was a student in public schools, if someone was getting out of line, they were immediately taken down and out of the classroom, by the teacher. So we've got to look at strategies to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
I like what our administration does. I mean, we're mandated to have a policy in effect for bullying. I think we have a very good policy about bullying. We take basically a zero tolerance in bullying. But like Mr. Waller said, I think a lot has to do with parents too. I think you need to have parents that get involved with your kids and stay involved with your kids. I mean, teachers do an excellent job in watching these kids while they're here, but when they get out of school, there needs to be more structure there and these parents taking care of that.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Rebecca Califf?
As you know, the state has adopted the Common Core state standards, which are based on the college and career readiness skills. In your opinion, what do you believe is the right balance of content and skill in education, and how should technology play a role in the teaching of both?
Candidates? Mr. Neville?
Common Core is basically a set of standards, okay? And what we're looking for is to hold students accountable for standards. It's not a curriculum in itself, and I think it's put together, I think, by 45 different state education folks and governors who want to see some common standards that we hold our kids accountable for in terms of skills and content. And so when we're looking around the country, kids are being held towards the same standards as they are in one state that they are in another. That isn't the case today, or it wasn't the case prior to that movement. The balance between content and skills, I think we're evolving into this, and I think we're going to see that work out. But I think what we're looking for are things that we can see, skills that we can measure, things that kids are able to do, that they can demonstrate, and that's what these common standards allow us to look for.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Mrs. Thurston? Mr. Boulay?
Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about the nuts and bolts of Common Core at this point. I would just say a short comment regarding embracing technology, basically in any curriculum. I'm a techie. I have technology just as much as I'm sure most of the people here do in my everyday life. I think it's a good thing, while respecting the classic methods. I think it's a good means of expanding what our kids are experiencing.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. Mr. Janitis?
There always comes a time when you say something that's going to get you in trouble, and I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think Common Core is crap. I really do. I think it originated out of big business. I think Bill Gates and that crew had a lot to do with bringing it in to the forefront. I think the states bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. There are a few states, I think originally 3 that didn't, but there are a lot of states now that are starting to question whether or not they're into Common Core. Our CMT scores, our CAP scores and everything, if you watched the board meeting the other night, went up very nicely. So why are we changing everything? Why is the state making us do it?
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
Just because something is new doesn't make it better. Common Core is, to me, a lot more than just a state of national standards. There's Common Core aligned curriculum, which means that you're fitting into a base program. It is big business interfering with education. It's turning more of education into big business, and I'm reluctant to just jump on board for it. Enfield knows what Enfield needs. Local control of schools is dramatically important. It's the only way that you're going to get the level of accountability that education deserves. Common Core is no different than No Child Left Behind, except for one big thing. It's a genetically altered twin on steroids. This is what brought you your teacher evaluation system that's going to cost us $1.2 million extra without netting a single thing for our students. Big government is not the answer, and again, because something's new doesn't make it better.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Unghire?
I only know very little about Common Core, and I don't believe the teachers are for it. I believe that Enfield knows what Enfield needs.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
This is just another grandiose scheme that's going to take away time from teachers to teach students, and I'm opposed. Teachers need more time to teach students.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
Well, I guess it's a change, and I see a lot of people who don't like change and they're opposed to change. I'm willing to give it a chance and see how it works, and if it works for us, we use it. If it doesn't, we don't use it. But just because you have an idea that it's not, you have to give it a chance. It's like everything else we changed in our district. Some people didn't like it at first, and they saw how it worked, and it worked out fine.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. LeBlanc?
I've done some research on the Common Core standards, and I don't think any new plan is perfect. I like the fact that the Common Core is trying to set clear standards for the students and the teachers. In the same respect, they're not telling the teachers how to teach it. They are relying on the teachers to teach it individually, which I believe a lot of the teachers do. They have to, every day, adapt to their students, whether it's 24 kids in a class, how 12 kids learn versus 1. The Common Core is also set not only for school and college readiness to move on, but they're hoping it'll help with career readiness. If 45 states adapted to it and Connecticut didn't, as a parent, I would be concerned because we need to remain competitive with other states in the United States so that Connecticut's education is valued.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Christine Luxick?
How important do you feel a quality education system is to our community? How does funding impact the quality you feel education delivers in Enfield?
Candidates?
Yeah. How important do you feel a quality education system is to our community? How does funding impact the quality you feel education delivers in Enfield?
Mr. Janitis?
Quality education, not just Enfield, anywhere, is extremely important. You get a good education, and it's you're going down the road for the rest of your life. As far as the costs and money's being supported, money doesn't buy good education. You can spend all the money you want, but if you don't have good teachers in the classroom, teachers who are allowed to teach as opposed to being hooked in this new evaluation system, the Common Core stuff, the data collection, everything that's being piled on now is taking away from a teacher's time to prepare and work with the kids, and it's hurting the kids, it's hurting the teachers' morale. Just throwing money at it isn't going to solve the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
A significant portion of Common Core, just like No Child Left Behind, forces our teachers to data mine instead of teach. They're busy filling out punch sheets and collecting information on the students, and some of it is intrusive in my opinion, but nonetheless, they're not teaching, they're mining data. It's one of the #1 complaints I heard while I was sitting on the board from our teachers is they spend too much time filling out paperwork when they would rather teach. Again, Enfield knows we know what we need. We pay extremely well for our professionals to do with their job. We trust them. This is not supposed to be a big program that's mandated and governed every inch and every square. I mean, you guys are the parents. You can't lose even one kid on an experiment. This is too important. As far as the funding goes, if the state lived up to its obligation, your property taxes would stay low, and we wouldn't have had to consolidate. But because the state was negligent, we had to consolidate, because if we didn't, the school systems would have collapsed under their own infrastructure. We couldn't afford them anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Unghire?
I think a quality education is very important. We need to produce well-rounded adults into society. Not every child's going to want to continue to college. They may want to go to a trade school or something like that, but they need to know all their options and be prepared for it.
Thank you, Mrs. Unghire. Mr. Walwer?
I'm going to answer it a little bit differently. I believe that the citizens of Enfield have been investing in education quality for the past 8 to 10 years. We have new gymnasiums at our elementary schools. We have new libraries at our elementary and middle schools. We have new athletic fields at the 2 high schools. We have books that were bought by the town council. We are investing in electronic equipment, computers, laptops, and have been for the past 3 or 4 years. I believe that our citizens know what Enfield needs, and they've been investing in our children.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
I agree. We can't, funding the quality education, it's not about the money all the time. It's about the teachers that teach our students. The quality of education is produced by the teachers in the school. It's the tools that we give the teachers that educate our students. Do we have to go spend $1 million and millions of dollars to get quality teachers? No. We get the good teachers, we get the young teachers, we support the older teachers, we give them the tools to give them that quality education. We don't have to spend a lot of money to do that, no.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. LeBlanc?
I believe that a quality education is important for the town in general. If you offer quality education, young families are going to move into town and settle there and stay there. Like Mr. Walwer says, there has been some investment with the athletic fields and different things like that. However, we need students to come to school here in order to share that investment. And when I feel families are leaving and maybe going to magnet schools or moving out of town because they feel that the Enfield school system is substandard, that hurts me, because we should be working our hardest to prove that this is not a substandard system. Funding is important, but it's not the only thing that makes a quality education in the town. The quality of teachers, which we have great teachers in Enfield, the administration, and just the community in general help make education a quality in a town, not just funding.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Neville?
I don't think any of us would want to live in a town that didn't have a quality education. And I think all of us on the board subscribe. We want a quality education. The question is, how do you get there? Money isn't the only thing, but it's something, okay? If we're trying to have our kids be competitive with kids in other towns across Connecticut, then we need to provide opportunities to those kids. Sometimes those opportunities take dollars to provide. And I think what we're looking for is to give our kids what other kids get throughout the state. I'd love to see unfunded mandates addressed, because Mr. Surratt is correct in that issue. We deal with that every day, and whatever we can do without state legislators to deal with that, I think would be a positive thing. But I don't think you can sit down and not fund education or have flat funding for 5 years and say that we're going to have everything, opportunity that other districts have.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. May I please remind the audience to please silence your cell phones? Thank you. Mrs. Thurston?
Quality education, I mean, that's why the 10 of us are up here. That's our goal. And I can't believe I'm going to say this in public, but I actually agree with what Mr. Janitis said. I won't ever say that again. But I mean, that's the main reason that we're here. And the teachers that are in the classrooms, they love what they do. If they didn't, they wouldn't be there.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. Mr. Boulay?
First thing I would like to address is the comment that our schools are substandard. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we certainly would have room for improvement, but I wouldn't necessarily refer to our schools as substandard. As far as general quality of education goes and how it relates to the community, it's extremely important. I mean, one of the first things that families do when they're looking to relocate for any reason is look at one of a couple of different websites and find out how that town's school system performs, whether they have children or they're planning to have children. So, I mean, of course it's important. But as other people have said, money does not necessarily directly correlate to quality.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. That ends our audience questions. If you wrote a question for the particular candidate, please see that candidate after the debate, while the refreshments are being served. Now it's time for the closing remarks. Each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes or 90 seconds for his or her closing remarks. We are starting with the Republicans. Mr. David Boulay.
Just want to reiterate my thanks for this entire event. It's actually been very educational, and I'm very appreciative of it for everyone involved. I know that everyone here, and as Mrs. Thurston said, everyone here is sitting here because we would love to provide a Cadillac education to our kids, and they're worth every penny, of course. I just have a little bit of caution. I like to be able to admit when certain things that we can afford are not necessarily up to Cadillac standards. We owe that respect to our taxpayers, after all. Whatever the new board looks like, it needs to try to encourage more transparency and less fat in its budget. Threatening teacher layoffs during budget negotiations and then hiring six-figure administrators, that to me, on the face of it, can be a problem. The new board needs to be careful with how it chooses to implement the Common Core mandates, because those can be a big strain. The new board should be more sensitive to parental and staff involvement with big decisions, like the armed guards. The new board will have to make a solid decision of the future use of Fermi, and all of the ideas should be considered. And above all else, the new board needs to dial down the party politics, and I'm kind of hopeful with how I've seen this go tonight. I'm very happy with, the level of agreement that I've seen up here.
Thank you, Mr. Boulay. Mr. Janitis?
Once again, thank you for hosting the debates. In my opening remarks, I mentioned a myriad of issues that prompted me to seek another term on the Board of Education, and I left off with some of the et ceteras, and that's where I'd like to pick up. I don't think this has been an open and transparent Board of Education. I still think we need an alternative ed program for troubled kids. Should we have an upper and lower middle school structure in two separate facilities? Are some books being read by some students at the high schools, and passages from these books are deemed inappropriate to be read at a Board of Ed meeting? We are currently spending $65 million for education here in Enfield. That's around 60% of the town's total budget. Costs increased this year, they're going to increase next year and the year after. The election this year is far too important to sit by and let it pass without a change in which party is in the majority. One person can't change the Board of Education's policy or direction. It takes a team. Please support my fellow candidates, Lori Ungeier, David Waller, David Boulay, Tom Serrard, and I thank you for your attention. I ask for your consideration, and please help us, help the entire town of Enfield, all of its people, to give our kids a sound and affordable education.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Mr. Serrard?
I want to thank everyone again for coming, and I want to thank you guys for doing a really wonderful job. You guys should be commended for it. Education is far too important to be run from a bureaucracy from either Hartford or Washington, D.C. If you have a problem with a federal program and you try to call the president, I doubt very much you're going to get him. If you have a problem with local education, if you call me on my phone, I'm the one that answers it. I'm also the guy that responds to your email. That's the kind of accountability that you need for something as important as education. That's why I've always been saying Enfield knows what Enfield needs, and it's nobody else's business. We have a very good school system in Enfield. We compete with every other town, and we compete very well. We're doing actually better than the state when it came to our last testing batteries. Better than the state. We have everything to be proud, and there's always room for improvement, but we're trying very hard. I'm hoping very much to have your support this coming year. I would like to sit back on because I'm very passionate about education. I want to get the best education that we can afford. I also want to continue to put pressure on our representatives in the State House to make sure that they do their part, which they have been negligent in. And that's the only word for it. I also ask that you support my team members, Mr. Boulay, Mr. Janitis, Ms. Ungeier, and Mr. Waller. They too are passionate about education, and they too deserve your support, because we've done a lot of good things together as a majority, and we tried really hard to do good things in a minority. But we've done some good things, and it's been good for Enfield.
Thank you, Mr. Serrard. Mrs. Ungeier?
Thank you again for having us all here. I consider it a privilege to even run for the board. I'm just going to leave you with this quote. Sometimes what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. So let's do this together. We've heard what we have to do. We've seen what we need to do. Now it's time to do it. And together, I think we can do it.
Thank you, Mrs. Ungeier. Mr. Waller?
First of all, I want to thank our moderator. I think you would make a very good politician in Hartford. And Hartford's where I want to begin, because that is the genesis of a lot of the problems that we have to deal with here in the town of Enfield when it comes to cost and programming. I pledge, if elected, to be your voice, to educate our two state representatives, to educate the Committee on Education, to educate the Department of Education on how Enfield knows what Enfield needs. We need to continue to strive for more local control of our education system not have it taken away. Again, I pledge to be your voice. I pledge to listen. I pledge to listen to the majority and the consensus of that majority on decisions impacting you and your children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walwer. Mr. Grady?
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity tonight. The Enfield High Youth Vote Committee, also the citizens who took their time out of their night and come and listen to our views on the school board. I just want to say that this last term has been a very exciting term. We've made many strides for the town of Enfield. We lost two valuable board members of Joyce Hall and Ms. Rancourt, but we have two great replacements of Vinnie Westlisa and Stacy Thurston, who used to be on the board. I ask you to support us. I ask you to support Tina and Tim also, because I want to continue in making those strides and making Enfield a great place to get an education and get these kids back from the magnet schools and get them into the public education, which we all believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mrs. LeBlanc?
I would like to thank you for the Youth Vote Committee for having us tonight. This was a great event, and you can tell that you guys spent a lot of time preparing and getting ready for this. I believe as a board member, we have an obligation to students, families in the community to prepare the students for their next journey, whether it's college, a vocation, or entering the workforce. But the foundation should start as early as possible. We need to, as a school district, stop saying what we can't do for the education system, but what we can do. As a board member, I will continue to offer a clear vision and a strategic plan with measurable goals. I believe that if I am elected, along with my fellow candidates, Vinnie Grady, Tim Neville, Vinnie Westlisa, and Stacy Thurston, that we can make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. LeBlanc. Mr. Neville?
Thank you. As the others, I'd like to thank all of you for having us here. It's a great opportunity for us, and I hope you got as much out of it as we did. I think you've asked some wonderful questions, and they were crafted quite well, and you've been a wonderful audience as well. So let me briefly try to tie together the reasons that I'd like you to consider to elect myself and my colleagues here to the board on November 5th. Most of us are veterans on the board, at least for the 2 years here, and we've had some successes. The successes we've had did not come by accident. They have been because we found common ground and collaborated with Democrats and Republicans, both on the board and town council, to get good things for kids, things that kids needed. Rachel's Challenge is one thing we've talked about. That's one result of the collaboration. All Day K is another. Additionally, working together, we hired a quality administrative team with a vision for education and move Enfield forward towards a 21st century education. We've successfully moved a high school referendum through with a building that we all can be proud of and one that will support the quality education our students not only need, but they deserve. We brought a significant budget increase through the budget process that helps us maintain positive academic growth, keeps class sizes reasonable, and one that includes a long-term need, all-day kindergarten. Additionally, we increased updated technology at all levels and a long-range plan to continue moving forward in that area. My point is we've established a way to work together towards some common goals. That's what I believe our collective job is all about, working with all constituencies, parents.
Thank you, Mr. Neville.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Thurston?
Thank you again for having us here tonight. I think myself, Mr. Neville, Ms. LeBlanc, and Mr. Grady, Mr. Westlisa, we're all willing to work hard. If we weren't, we wouldn't be up here right now. Quality education is very important, keeping your children safe. Please, elect us, and, we'll work great as a team and make the public schools, the best they can be.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurston. This concludes this evening's debate. I would like to thank the candidates for their participation and for providing Enfield High School students with the opportunity to become more so acquainted with the democratic process. On behalf of the Enfield High School Youth Vote Committee, I would like to thank Enfield High School Youth Vote Advisors, Mr. Sean Patrick Crane, Mr. Sine, and Ms. Winthrop, Ms. Krieger, and the Enfield High School Administration, Mr. Crowley, Mr. O'Neill, and the Enfield High School custodial staff. The Enfield Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Schumann, and the central office staff and administration. The ETV staff who filmed tonight's debate, and last but not least, you, our audience members, who participated in tonight's important civic event. I would also like to remind the public that Enrico Fermi High School Youth Vote Committee will be hosting a debate between candidates running for the Town of Council of Enfield in the Fermi Auditorium at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, October 29th, 2013. Also, this debate will be aired on ETV and the Enfield television channel on YouTube from now until Election Day for all those who are unable to attend. We now invite you to enjoy the refreshments outside in the hallway and take the chance to speak with the candidates. Have a safe and pleasant night. Thank you.